Hello, and welcome to our discussion today. I'm KJ Burke, Principal Technology Strategist for the Hybrid Cloud here at CDW Canada. We've got a couple of people from NetApp. We're going to let them introduce themselves, but really quick, and we've got Ryan from my team here. Real quick, I just want to go through the agenda. Really appreciate your time today. We're going to keep the slides brief and then get into the discussion quickly. We're going to do some introductions. We're going to talk a little bit about what CDW and NetApp together and kind of what our status is. We want to talk a little bit about the current state and the challenges we're seeing across the modern data center, solutions to some of those challenges, some of the additional trends that we're seeing, things in the future, and we want to talk about some of the NetApp tools and the kit that are available to really be successful. But maybe Ryan, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll hand it off to the NetApp team to introduce themselves.
Absolutely, thanks, KJ. So Ryan Beauchamp, I'm Principal Solution Architect for CDW based out of Vancouver. Been in the IT industry for probably just about 20 years coming up, covering everything from desktops to server, cloud at this point, and here for technical pre-sales to have that vendor independent kind of modernization and kind of strategic initiatives for all of our customers across Canada. I'll turn it over to Keith from the NetApp team.
Sounds good. Thanks, Ryan. Keith Aasen. I am a product manager on the ONTAP organization within NetApp. Been with NetApp now for just a little over 14 years. But prior to that, I worked in the virtualization space, virtualization ecosystem, and cut most of my teeth actually out in the field in technical pre-sales, very similar to what Ryan's doing, but now hopped over to the product management side of things. Why don't I pass it over to my colleague, Phoebe.
Thanks, Keith. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Phoebe Goh. I am a principal technical evangelist at NetApp, but I started my career as a sysadmin, and I've worked in professional services, pre-sales, and in the architecture teams over the years in my almost decade here at NetApp. I have spent most of the last, I'd say 3-4 years working with our cloud technologies. So that's where I focus most of my energy, but definitely working with our partners and their customers, because you see all the good things that are happening out there in the real world. So I'm really excited to be here and to join this conversation. Back to you, Keith.
Yeah, thanks, Phoebe. Yeah, we're really excited to have you and Keith and Ryan. So real quick, and we want to make this interactive. So those of you that are on the call, if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A section to go ahead and ask any of those questions. We're happy to just insert those into the conversation as we get going. A little bit about where NetApp and CDW are. NetApp is one of our key partners. And so, as part of the Scalar acquisition, we've been working with NetApp for, 10, 15 years now. And the NetApp approach to data and now this importance on data, I think really is key for a lot of our customers. But I just wanted you to see that we're very invested in what NetApp does, not just in the data center, but also in the public cloud and what they can offer at the edge and some of the management tools there. For those of you that just aren't aware, CDW, we have a NOC and a SOC 24/7 managed services arm to our organization. We actually do management of NetApp in the data center, management of NetApp in the cloud. We have managed services around some of their data protection and replication tooling. And you have a wealth of resources at CDW, like Ryan, like myself, that can come in and do pre-sales architecture and work with you on your solutions integration. We break this up into, an assess phase, architecture phase, implement phase, and then an operate phase. And so, we can help you through those assessments and looking at what you're trying to accomplish, drill down those business objectives and build them into architectures, help you deploy those architectures, and then help you manage those architectures. So that's all the slides I have. So I'm gonna stop sharing. It's just really important that I think we want you to understand that NetApp is a very important partner for us. We have ability to help you do the design, the delivery, and then after the fact do the management. So let's kind of move into the conversation. And I know, Keith, when we were discussing before, I'm really excited that we brought Phoebe into the conversation, because the more expertise that we can get in front of our customers, I really think it helps better understand where we're at, where we can go, what the possibilities are, and how we resolve some of those challenges. So Keith, just start with you. why are most organizations really focusing on this hybrid cloud where they're building in the public cloud, but they're also still maintaining what they're doing in the data center, and there's continued investment at the edge? Like, well, why are you seeing organizations really go after it in that manner?
I think in the early days, there were pioneers that saw cloud as an opportunity to really change how they ran IT. And there's a few that dove into it sort of headfirst because of that. But the vast majority of customers I work with now have been pulled into the cloud in some way, shape, or form, right? They maybe have rather than making a strategic decision, for whatever reason, one of the services, one of the applications, one of the capabilities they need is only available in the cloud. And so they immediately find themselves in a hybrid type scenario where now have to manage resources and applications, both in their own on-prem data center as well as in the cloud. And that's presenting a whole net new set of challenges. Others may have done that and then had great success in the cloud and have increased that. Now I want to say, hey, what else can I move over to there to take advantage of what I'm experiencing on that side of things?
Yeah, and so Phoebe, to kind of continue on to that, I mean, having more of a cloud, like public cloud focus yourself, what are you seeing driving organizations to, link the public cloud to what they are doing traditionally, maybe in the data center?
Yeah, what Keith said really resonates. I think a lot of new innovation starts in the cloud. They spin up something, they get this great app going, it's fantastic, it grows, and then there's a point at which they go, well, hang on a second, how do we operate in these two modes? Well, we'd rather run in a hybrid state. We want one directory, for our users. We want one system to manage our payments. We want one. So they have to start linking them together. We want one security policy. I mean, we talk about security a lot, right? I'm sure you do. And you can't have, different policies, different expectations in different environments. So I think that's the driver. It's less of a technical one, but then the technology has to then support those needs, those business needs. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And anytime security gets mentioned, I report to the head of cybersecurity. So it's just like I just get to tell him, I say, hey, we talked about your stuff in our webinar today. So Ryan, I mean, you and I have the benefit of working with a lot of different customers and kind of seeing what they're doing. Well, from a customer perspective, again, why this we didn't move everything into the public cloud. Why not? But why are some of these applications and workloads being successful, in this hybrid methodology?
Yeah, I guess like I kind of took it where Keith said, some companies jumped in head first at the start. Some are kind of getting dragged. I found a lot of people kind of dipped their toes in Office 365, had success, got a little familiar with it, and then found that some of the innovations, the cloud native feature sets, like moving to SQL Server on demand off of their on-premise SQL, they got that familiarity and they realized that they could start moving things around, moving to more of an OpEx model. I think over the last 3 years, all of us here have talked at one point or another about supply chain issues, which has enhanced everyone kind of being dragged up into the public cloud because we still need to innovate, companies still need to grow. And so that growth kind of comes now of, hey, we can't grow on-prem, so we're going to dive fully into our public cloud of choice, whether it's Azure, it's Google, it's AWS, to adopt some of those features. And then they found out that, hey, this is easy. Their IT staff are starting to learn both. And then it's becoming, like you said, where's the best place to put these now? And we're finding that they're still having to build on-prem as well as still having to build in the cloud to try and take advantage of some of those other features. And that's where a lot of the conversations I have is marrying those two together for what's the best fit? How do we optimize those costs and kind of keep a single pane of glass, like as what Phoebe said of it, how do we manage across both of these? And then obviously wrap security, there you go, Theo, into everything, because you need to be able to protect both on-prem and in the cloud at the same time.
Hey, KJ, I'd like to add on to what Ryan said there, because some of the biggest challenges I've seen in customers are customers that have gone fully one direction or the other. So the ones that are adamant that I'm not going to touch the cloud, no way, no how, they're wrestling with some major problems that would be really easy to solve with the cloud, and it's sort of frustrating. And yet the same thing happens. I see customers are like, we are entirely cloud, we do nothing on-prem. have similar problems where things that are proved to be really challenging that like, oh, that is so easy to fix in an on-prem environment. So it's interesting that the hybrid is that nice spot to be. Now, it's not an easy place to be, to your point, trying to figure out what belongs where, but definitely I think we're nowhere near where it's possible really to be, or it's not optimal to be entirely one or the other.
Well, it depends on the customers too. I don't think that there's one perfect hybrid cloud. Like we used to say, okay, I have a primary data center and a secondary or a DR data center. Maybe I have three. And that kind of architecture, to dumb it down a little bit, is to say, well, everybody kind of had a similar setup. But when you look at companies and the way that they do hybrid, there's all sorts of it's one application in one cloud, it's one application in another cloud provider. Oh, I put this thing on premise. Like the combinations are endless.
Well, and to go on that, I think a lot of companies are starting to realize that public cloud has outages, services go down, and what do you do when that happens if you do a full cloud native? And having the ability to, hey, this went down, we still have an on-prem, it can get spun up over there, we're still going, business continuity is still intact, and gives you that flexibility.
Yeah, and I think we're moving towards kind of the second topic I wanted to cover, and so I'm going to kind of move into that one. We can keep this rolling though, because I do think you're starting to touch on some of the challenges that this poses for organizations, and when I look at it, I really say there's different attributes. The public cloud has certain attributes and qualities that we want to take advantage of, and you talked about that agility, you talked about the easy scalability, almost unlimited scalability. But the private data center still has attributes that are relevant for us, and that's why we're going to get to some later talking some about the NetApp tool set, but creating some of those consistencies or leveraging some of those values from the traditional data center in the public cloud. Again, there's a lot of value there. So we talked a little bit about potentially outages in the public cloud, and what we're seeing, unfortunately, is a lack of investment in the private data center, which is also leading to some outages there as well. And both of those are starting to have more impact on organizations. But what are some of the key challenges, Phoebe, when you look again from that cloud perspective, what are some of the challenges for organizations in this hybrid cloud world where they've got infrastructure that they're spreading across to the public cloud? Maybe they've made some assumptions about the way data is handled, but what are you seeing there as far as challenges?
The biggest one, well, the second biggest, because we'll just park security for the moment. We'll talk about that big challenge. But I think the thing that companies are seeing, or a lot of people are seeing, is that once you start uploading things into the cloud and it's in a different location, it's a logical location, it gets really hard to figure out what you have and where it is and who put it there and is it supposed to be there. And so that kind of just sprawl of data is really what's getting it's just hard. I mean, it's like when I upload photos from my my phone, and I've got thousands, and it's so easy to take them now, just like it's so easy to create data now and just upload it, or maybe it gets replicated into the cloud and we don't know what's happening or whether it even should be there. That to me is what I'm hearing over and over again. It's a scary thought we have to deal with, but that's a big one.
Yeah, as a previous like VMware administrator, I was deathly afraid of deleting VMDK files, or we're in the middle of nowhere. Like, what is on this? Do I need to attach it to something and browse it? But you're right. Like, you've got these volumes or this data you've created, and if you're not tagging it appropriately, if you don't have good data controls around it, absolutely.
Well, it's all online, and the same. I mean, I would extend that to things like VMs that you leave online in the cloud that now start costing you money. I mean, put your hand up if you still have a box of hard drives that you don't want to go through, but they're not connected to anything, and you just don't want to sort through those files.
Exactly.
If you think of that at the scale of a hyperscaler, and think of that, with all the fact that you're paying as well as your security risk because it's out there on in the public cloud. So that to me is just humongous, and it's a challenge that I think a lot of organizations kind of see that in the how are we going to deal with this? How do we do it? In our business, is there an easier way than going through every single file, folder, VM?
Absolutely. So, yeah, sorry, Ryan, go ahead.
I was going to say, Katie, thank you very much for mentioning tagging. I cannot stress enough, as companies move to public cloud, tagging becomes the most one of the most important things that you do in the cloud, to make sure that you understand where that data is, who's creating it, where it falls within the business units or the organization. Otherwise, it goes into one big bucket, and if you leave it long enough, it becomes completely unmanageable. Which then goes into, like you said, costing. Like costing, I think, is like a huge challenge, like you mentioned. But sorry, KJ, go ahead.
Well, and I'll add to that too, actually, to what Ryan said. So you tag things, and then the other part of it is automation and having either the tools that automate tagging things or the tools to automate doing something with that tag data. So, oh, this was tagged with highly secure, and it got accidentally put in the wrong place. Let's do something with that. And you want those systems to be smart. You want them to be kind of part of your workflows.
Yeah, for sure. And then Keith.
Yeah, I was going to add on to that is that things in the cloud can get out of control in a hurry, right? Is you sort of have this infinite scalability, not just in compute, but also in storage. And I think on-prem, we had sort of developed this idea of managing data because we had a finite number of resources, right? You knew exactly how many gigabytes or terabytes you had on your storage array, and you managed that accordingly, where you would archive things off as they got cold. You would limit how much data would be stored and how long it'd be stored for. But in the cloud, there's sort of things spin up quickly. Things start generating data from different sources and unexpectedly. And because you have this sort of infinite number of resources, people just tend to let it go rather than trying to take the time to figure out, what can I delete? What should be moved to a lower tier? How does that get moved? And it gets overwhelming really, really fast.
I think that's right. I mean, it's kind of like having a giant refrigerator and you're just sort of putting Tupperware, to store it for later, and you're storing it for later. And at the end of it, everything kind of looks the same. It's all in sort of a beige Tupperware container. And if you don't label anything, you're right. You don't know what it is. You don't know how long you should retain it. I think that's valid. And one of the things I'd like you guys to touch on a little bit is, and this isn't just the public cloud. Like, don't think we're just beating up on the public cloud. It's also, the data center and the edge. Out of our security study, it was interesting that one of the primary concerns that Canadian organizations have is really around data resiliency. So from a ransomware perspective, how do we protect that data, not just in the public cloud, but also on premises at the edge of our environment? And so that's one of the big challenges I'm seeing is as you start to spread that data around, as you start to move that data because you want to put applications, in the data center or in the public cloud based upon the attributes that you get out of those different infrastructures, data resiliency becomes a challenge because you don't have necessarily consistent tools available. So Keith, when you're talking to customers about data resiliency, maybe what are some of the things that you're focused in on with, to help them understand maybe some of the tools that are available, from a NetApp perspective when you dig into that?
Well, there's resiliency against, infrastructure failure, which is just as you mentioned, just as valid in a public cloud environment as there is on-prem. And that's just making sure that you're managing multiple copies at different locations with no common failure points. And that's just as true. If you're using an application that doesn't do that natively in the cloud, and you're using an application that's expecting highly available infrastructure, you need to do that same sort of due diligence around making sure that data is in alternate fail zones, whether that's within the same cloud provider, or one of the really attractive ways is actually hopping from cloud provider to cloud provider, where sometimes some of these failures will cascade on a cloud provider across multiple sites because it is a large ecosystem. Sometimes one of the most robust things you could do is actually keep data in two different cloud providers, to provide highly resilient. But with the concept of ransomware attacks, which of all the weird things that have happened since the pandemic, ransomware is sort of the most unfortunate of them, has really taken a huge uptick, and the attacks are becoming increasingly more sophisticated. But it's also an area that I think has sparked some really interesting innovation. At NetApp alone, there's really three different angles that we approach ransomware, which I think is fantastic. The more ways we can defend against it, the better. The first is on our systems themselves, on our ONTAP systems, we're looking at pattern detection, right? On normal file shares, users are chaotic, they're unpredictable. But when ransomware starts up, it's automation, right? It follows a particular pattern of how it goes and attacks files. And so we've trained our systems to recognize those patterns and react accordingly, giving you a recovery point and alerting you to a potential ransomware attack. But another entirely different method of detecting it is we use a cloud service and using AI in the cloud to do user analytics. And there we start building a database of what do your NAS users typically do? Which files do they normally access? How active are they? How rapidly do they read and write or access files? And when something changes radically from that user profile, suddenly somebody starts to do a ton more I/O, or they start doing a massive number of deletes. Again, we can flag and take steps to that. So I think there's some really cool innovation around protecting data that works equally well in the cloud as on-prem.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Part of what the conversations I'm having are, how do we build resiliency in layers? Because
Yeah.
it's just like security. You can't just have one failback. You have to have multiple layers. And so Ryan, one of the things that you were talking about as we were prepping for this was around, data hygiene and discovery. And so again, you've got data kind of all over the place. What are you seeing as far as challenges and maybe some of the means of addressing those challenges when it comes to data hygiene and data discovery?
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to organizations these days. Like, they've had this explosive growth in data over the last years, like in like petabytes. We're now talking about petabytes of terabytes to petabytes of data for some organizations, and we're having a problem of what is that data. A lot of IT doesn't entirely know what this data is. Specifically, some of the business units do, but there's always been a bit of a disconnect. So when we're talking about data hygiene, but it's really understanding an organization's data about where's the best place that it should live, what actually is it? Does it need to go to cloud? Does it need to go to SharePoint? Is this user files? Is this like a OneDrive? Because I can tell you there's a bunch of problems regardless of where you're going. There's no one silver bullet solution for understanding data, where the best fit is. And then layering your resiliency, as you wanted to say on that, is finite resources on-prem. Public cloud solved that with data tiering. NetApp has had data tiering for ages now. It's kind of become table stakes with most of the vendors that are out there, where we can tier into object, which object storage has a lot of immutability features that we can layer in to help protect against kind of ransomware. But I do find that when we're talking about that, there's also that security part. It needs to be layered, like you said, where it can't just be backup. It can't just be NetApp. There should be the front end, the middle, and then the last resort. And you have to have the full stack. And too often I find customers are reaching on their backup and layering this on their backup, or saying, we're going to trust fully in like the one NetApp with their AI, which is great. It's a lot of innovation that's come in and around it, but it doesn't always solve kind of what you're going. So backups are important, but also, like you said, understanding where that data, should it go to SharePoint, limitations within SharePoint of throughput for when you're doing kind of backups. Like, SharePoint was never meant to scale to petabytes of data. So if you're thinking, hey, we're going to put this all into SharePoint Online, I can tell you're probably going to have some troubles, and I'm probably going to be talking to you about how do we fix this and bring this back and understand this and be like, no, this is more of a traditional file system that you need to implement. And there's ways that we can leverage that from an on-prem and a cloud to help cost optimize that, as well as adding that resiliency to go across multiple clouds, multiple regions, dispersing your data. Like, a big topic I've had the last little while is like, kind of, let's take all your file data in a single point of truth. Let's make that big bucket of data in the cloud your full repository, and then let's branch cache this out to all the different locations. Sorry, Keith, go ahead.
Oh. So something you said earlier on, I wanted to jump on before it leaked out of my ear, was seeing what data is there is huge, right? Knowing what's in that data store is massive. That's the first step. What to do with it is the hard part after that. And kind of our data inventory tool, Cloud Data Sense, that gives you that data, takes it a little bit further to give you some pre-done templates around recommendations, things like HIPAA that will say, hey, based on that, we can say which data is out of compliance, things are identified that should be moved or shouldn't be there. But really, you need often need an expert to come in as well. And I'm gonna say that's where KJ, I think CDW, you have those experts that can, once you've identified what the data actually is, or even help the customers identify the data, help make those recommendations and a plan for how to remediate that and get the data out of places it shouldn't be.
Yeah, I wanted to add as well, so Ryan, as you were speaking, it was kind of like you cannot solve this problem at just the backup level. Like you said, people tend to go, well, I've got the second copy, so let's layer all this protection on that copy. But then I have primary copies where there's things happening or potential for ransomware attacks or potential for the wrong data being stored. And I think, so one of the things that I see, I get to sit on a lot of, futuristic, visionary calls from NetApp's perspective. And one of the things that I see us doing in the portfolio is, yes, we have these solutions on the storage and in the cloud and looking at users, but our destination is to build that into a framework where you don't have to really think about which product is it that I turn on. Do I need to turn on the cloud data sense or the insights or but to kind of wrap it into that framework through the support of partners, knowing which of those services they turn on and how to best utilize it for a specific environment. So maybe there's data on premises that needs to move into the cloud. Well, they'll be able to pick and choose how to do that. So that's one angle, is kind of trying to, I hate the word simplify, because I think this is an incredibly complex thing, but I definitely see it as creating that usability of all of these tools and features in our portfolio. And then the other thing that I also see, which kind of Keith touched on, and I've totally forgotten now, so I'm going to just drop that and it'll come back to me in a second.
That's what happens when you got four people who all like to talk, and they've got ideas, and you want to get in there, and
many ideas.
Yeah, I mean, and the key takeaway from that is, for the customers that are on the call here, we love to have these conversations. We love to engage, and you're right. Like we've got a member of the NetApp A team, Chris Mackey, that works for us in Vancouver, and Chris is dynamite when it comes to NetApp technologies. I love to get in the room with Chris and just kind of let him go, because and what's really interesting is a lot of what we're talking about, snapshots, data immutability, data discovery, those are not things that cloud native architects really have as good a handle on as some of the traditional, like, old dogs like myself and Ryan. Like we solve those problems in the data center, but many of those challenges exist for a lot of these smaller, medium-sized businesses that are trying to work in the public cloud. And recently I went to a Collision conference in Toronto, and the number one conversation starter I had with startups was, well, what are you doing about data resiliency? How are you really attacking that? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you developed your application. It doesn't matter if you signed your customers up. It really matters, like, are you protecting their data and their information? And I agree with you, Keith. I would say data resiliency is like an ogre, which is like an onion, and it has layers. But at least my kids would want me to say that. So yeah, no, I agree. And then Ryan, sorry, if you wanna add.
We're like resiliency is one thing, I think, but going back to kind of like the initial question of like kind of challenges that we go is like something that some organizations maybe forget to think about is, what is the user experience going to be like when you're going to like either of these? Like, we're talking about data hygiene, like resiliency, like end of the day, we're IT, we're still supporting end users and the base. Like, what does it look like for them? And I think that's probably one of the key things I have just with my experience of over the years. I've worked with so many end users, and it's always kind of, hey, how does this affect the team that I'm going to be putting this in there? I think that sometimes that question has a bit of a pause for some of the IT teams, where it's like, oh, you're right.
And I'm gonna do a throwback to the virtualization days too, right? One of the reasons that VMware and virtualization took off so quickly is you didn't have to modify the applications, right? Modifying apps is hard. And if you were to truly build an app for the cloud and true app develop like cloud developed apps have solved all of those problems internally, right? They take care of their own resiliency. They expect the infrastructure to be unreliable, and so they take care of their own data protection and having multi-site durability. But going back to the VMware days, one of the reasons that took off is we didn't need to modify the application, but we very quickly learned that there are things that we needed to change. And I remember the early days where everybody had a backup agent in every physical server, right? And as soon as we moved all those into VMs, and all those backup agents fired up at the same time on the same host, right? The host would tip over. And so we very quickly learned that, hey, we still have to do backup, but that's not how we do backup. I think the same thing is happening in cloud, where yes, I can pick up an application and I can port it over to the cloud without changing it. And it works, but it's not optimal, right? There's things there that we have to now do differently because now we're running on infrastructure that's not as durable and available as what we have on-prem. And so we although it functions, we need to change how we actually move those applications.
Yeah, and I think one thing we're sort of skirting around here is also the shared responsibility model. So one last thing, and then we'll transition into, okay, great. We talked about all sorts of things. We talked about some of the things we can do about, but then let's really change the focus to, how do organizations, start solving for these challenges. But the shared responsibility model is critical. It's critical to understand that you're right. Your application developers may be developing and leveraging, cloud native services, but are they still getting the retention? Are they still getting, the resiliency that their compliancy teams require? And so again, that was one of the number one conversations I had was, okay, great. What are you doing about, an outage or a data loss or a virtual disk that you've lost in the cloud? And so let's shift to, well, what can organizations start with? How do organizations, manage across this new data center, which exists in the public cloud, exists in their data center, and also exists at the edge? So Ryan, where do you feel organizations need to focus on learning when they're starting to transform that business? Like, what do they need to know?
I guess it's the first part is, what is your application doing? What are all the dependencies that we're mapping when you're thinking about building these new applications or migrating them? How does it function between there? You can't move a front end or a back end to a cloud while keeping the one side on-prem. So you have to kind of look at, we need to modernize that application, make it more cloud native. Or if you are just going to shift everything, right sizing. I think we've all had a ton of conversations at some point in time as being administrators of, hey, the database administrator wants 128 gigs of memory and 32 cores for this small little application. That does not translate to a very nice bill when we're coming down to cloud, and understanding what you're doing with that is the first kind of question I have. Is like that old adage of measure twice, cut once. When you're starting to implement both is kind of where I see some of that kind of going.
And that's a really good point. And I want to ask Phoebe about this, because one of the things I think, NetApp has focused in on is around some of those visibility tools and pulling that out. And so Phoebe, FinOps, financial operations reporting, has become more and more important as these applications have moved into the cloud. And as Ryan mentions, maybe you're getting value out of the application, but it's not optimized. So, and maybe could you talk a little bit about, some of the tools or some of the things that you focus in on with organizations when they get the AWS bill and they're like, oh my gosh, what do we do?
Yeah, and there's one thing I wanted to add to what Ryan said as well, and it might be a gimme, of course we do this, but it's just knowing who needs to be involved in the conversation when you are thinking about cloud. Because as infrastructure, if I was moving a data center, or if I was, building a new site, or maybe spinning up a new VMware cloud, I don't have to talk to anybody about that. I just do it. But when it comes to cloud, there's so many other people in the organization. The application owner is just one of those, and the DBAs, but then you start to talk to other folk about how we best, what skills do we currently have? What skills do we need? What things should we consider when we're thinking about procurement in the cloud? Those conversations all need to kind of be had before stuff gets moved over there. But that was just a thought I had. And I think we all kind of assume it, but then it doesn't always happen because we just want to get to the good stuff. But to FinOps, well, FinOps is a good explanation of that. You know, that's when I haven't spoken to my procurement team, and there's a bill that comes through, and the credit card is a little bit overdrawn, and there's a lot of line items on there that maybe I didn't think that I was actually purchasing when I went out there and spun up a VM. You know, I've got networking costs, and I've got storage costs, and I've got all sorts of things. So FinOps is that. Is actually, you know, it takes its name from DevOps, which was kind of thinking about how do we simplify operations of developers and managing applications, and once they're live, once they're in production, their whole life cycle. So FinOps is the same thing as that. It's not a purchase that you do once. It's something that you're doing every month. Every time you spin up a new resource, you're buying something. So how do we optimize that, and how do we operationalize that through, you know, intelligent procurement is one thing, and you can do that when you're building the application, but things change over time. And so how do I automate some of that? And so the NetApp Spot portfolio, it's called Spot by NetApp, but there's a number of features within that that help organizations that are in the cloud reduce or manage or even just view what their spend is. The thing I really like about it is that it looks at waste. Waste is any resource that you've spun up in the cloud that you're not actually using. And if you're doing that on premises, waste is maybe a couple of dollars on your power bill. But in the cloud, that becomes real money because that service is being charged even though you're not using it at all. And so we help users of the Spot portfolio optimize their bill by saying, well, here's a wasted resource. Maybe you could move that to a more efficient charging model. So that's, you know, using reserved instances instead of using the on-demand instances. We also look at those customers, to what Keith was saying, who are building cloud native, which often leverages Spot instances, which are instances that are just provisioned when there's capacity, and so they tend to be cheaper, but then they can also disappear at a moment's notice. But you can use those really intelligently, even for workloads that are data heavy or user heavy. If you're using something like Spot that's looking across your entire fleet, looking at how much things cost and looking at how you can best utilize those resources. So that's, you know, really, really exciting because it uses so much, to my point earlier, automation and AI in the back end. They're things that you couldn't do I mean, maybe if you, no, I don't even think you could do that as a person, you know, sitting there at the computer nonstop. It'd be like being a day trader. It's hard. It's just such hard work, and it has to be done continuously. So we have tools that automate that. And that's really, really exciting in my mind.
Yeah, and I don't think that that's a portfolio of tools that a lot of NetApp customers have really explored yet. And so again, you know, that's an area where if you're interested and you want to sort of you know, build out understanding, again, Ryan, myself, the CDW team, we're happy to kind of get in front of you and go through some of the value add there. And I think it really speaks a bit to what Ryan was talking about with just the overall complexity of the applications. And you're right, in some ways you need to start grouping your applications. Is this a real-time application, or can this be a scheduled application? And in the cloud, you know, in the data center, everything's running, and it's like, okay, maybe I turn some things off and I spend some things like my backup server on at night and it gets really busy. But what you're talking about is, if I can wait 24 hours for this information and I can process that in the cloud at half the cost, maybe there's business value in doing that. So that's a level of visibility that, you know, we just haven't had to have in the traditional on-premises data center. So Keith, you know, when businesses are kind of, to get back to transformation, when you're working with businesses, you're talking about transformation, you know, where do you start that conversation? And then, you know, where are organizations need to maybe start to look at how they change their process, not just their technology?
I think, as you said, the process, the technology is one thing, right? Is it all works? It's and the technology is there and easily consumed in the cloud and on-prem. It's all quite well known, but the process is the tricky one. So the whole process of determining on an existing app or a new app, where should it be running, right? Should app be deployed on-prem or in the cloud? And ideally, that's done in an automatic way that isn't, you know, it's not a bunch of people sitting around a table anymore. It's a few simple questions about the application that determines where that goes, and then that application needs to plug into the ecosystem seamlessly. Also, when the app is deployed, regardless of on-prem or in the cloud, it should inherit those data protection policies that reflect where it is and the type of data that it has contained within it. So that you should have those recovery points, you should have the ransomware protection, you should have the site resiliency, and that should happen seamlessly as part of the deployment. It needs to be consistent regardless of where it's actually deployed. And then the last element, I think, which has gotten a little more complicated, that people need to think through, is data lifecycle, right? We used to always kind of think about the life cycle of data of, from memory to disk to tape, and ultimately would be destroyed. Now in the cloud, as I said, there's that temptation of infinite resources where maybe it just goes into disk and it stays there forever, right? That's probably not the right place for it. At some point, that data maybe needs to be brought back on-prem, which will be a lower cost option potentially, or that data should be destroyed. But those data life cycles need to be thought about at the time of deployment, because if you wait until you have a few hundred terabytes, it's really hard to act after the fact. It's something that, the process of deploying a new application needs to be really thought through in this hybrid world.
I want to challenge that a little, Keith. As somebody who spends a lot of time in the cloud, I don't always know what I'm going to do with the data set. So, I'd love to be able to say, here's 200 terabytes I've got on premises. This is what it's going to look like in the cloud. But often, 6 months later, there's a pandemic or the supply chain disappears or something happens and I need to be agile. That's part of the reason we picked the cloud, which lets me spin up and down resources quickly, right? So yep. I want to challenge that a little bit and say, you really want to start looking at the way that you store your data that gives you that flexibility. So don't just lock it into an SSD in the cloud thinking, oh, well, it's tearing off, at some point. Have a way to get back that data. Don't lock it in cold storage that takes you 6 months to get back, because that could be expensive. It could be, that your business could have moved on and you're still trying to get back that backup or that recovery point. So I think, definitely thinking about it is really important, but then also being open to some of and NetApp is to talk about some of our tools, having the ability to convert data between data types, from from NAS to SAN, you can run them both in the same volume, or to object and back again, moving that data around, or having that tiering that's so seamless that it will pull the data back once it starts realizing it's being used without you having to go, oh, I've got to go trigger that event now. So I think that there's some really, really intelligent operations that can happen, but you do have to think about that so you can put your data on something that has that intelligence.
Well, Ryan mentioned earlier on about businesses that were developing applications in the cloud provider. And that sort of sparked something for me too, is I have seen that as well, as a business will develop their application, tie it into services in one cloud provider so tightly that they're forever locked in that cloud provider, right? It becomes very, very difficult to move in. And not to say that you shouldn't take advantage of the services that are there, but there is that element of what Phoebe was saying is when you're developing an application in the cloud, it's nice to have that portability to say, I'm building this in Azure today, but I want this to be able to run in AWS tomorrow or Google the day after, in case that provides me an economic or strategic advantage.
Keith, you just took the one thing I was about to jump in and say is portability is something that we really need to start talking about for, we need to be able to deploy this on-prem and work with developers. Maybe you need to develop an app on-prem and then move it into the cloud for its production value, or vice versa, and making sure you're not tying yourself so closely into those native services that negates any ability to deploy anywhere. Having this deploy anywhere on-prem, in the cloud, regardless of the cloud methodology, is it's a new mindset, it's a new shift. Oracle comes to mind of databases and trying to get off Oracle, or you're down a single stack. It makes it very tricky, and companies are very much, they want to be sticky with you. Katie, when you asked about the change of process, in my head, it popped back in instantly to an old slide that we use, and I still kind of use it today, is the people, process, technology. Those are the three pillars that we're talking about when we're dealing with modernization and digital transformation. It's like you have to tackle each of those individually at the same time. And the biggest process that I think that we should start looking at doing is, it's who's in the room. Like IT ops used to do one thing. We have to involve developers now. It's the developers that are running a lot of the business applications and where they're going. And like credit cards being used, shadow IT, having a tool that can kind of look across your entire tenant and say, hey, you know what, we're missing tagging over here because someone instantly spun something up and we need to put a resource group against it, tagging. We need to understand what it's doing now. Should it live there? Do that assessment. And then, you know, if it doesn't live there, well, is it stateless? Can we just start running it on-prem? But what do you want to do with that leftover data? And that goes into your lifecycle management of your data as well. I find a lot of companies are not utilizing tools that are in there that are meant to help them do data lifecycle management, where it does the auto tiering through the cycle and then putting like an end date on some of that data. So you know what, after 7 years, that can go away. We'll archive it through a backup product, or we just don't need it anymore. And understand that.
I want to ask actually, Ryan and KJ, are you seeing a lot of data reuse use cases as well? Which is that I had a backup and it was I mean, I see this in retail happening a lot. You know, we have backups. We collect a lot of data about our customers. Hang on a second, we could start using that. You know, it's not just backup data. It becomes trend information, insights. It becomes analytics data. Are you seeing a lot of that in Canada?
I think what we're starting to see is there are leaders in the AI, machine learning, HPC space that are starting to mine that data, and they are getting competitive advantage from doing that. And so, shameless plug, CDW, we build some of the biggest HPC environments. We love to build AI environments. So happy to talk to you about that in a different forum. But yes, absolutely. And to Phoebe's point, there's a huge fear of missing out if we do tier that data down, if we do cold storage that data, and I need to get insights out of that data in a real-time manner, all of a sudden we've just archived our way out of a business opportunity. And so what we're seeing, I think, is a lot of organizations have either compiled that data and they're getting value out of that data, or there's a second tier of organizations that are hoarding that data. And they're saying, well, we don't know what data has value, so we want to store it all. And that's kind of leading to this explosive growth of data. And so not only retail, but also services like IoT, where we're starting to bring sensor data, whether that's retail or healthcare or education or smart cities or smart offices, smart manufacturing. All of that types of data is now being generated and it has to go someplace. And that's why we're still seeing investment at the edge. We're still seeing investment in the data center. We want to use the public cloud as a low cost mechanism to put that. So yes, we're starting to see that. But as the entry point to some of those machine learning tools lowers, I think we're going to see more and more smaller enterprise, medium-sized business start to take advantage of that data, because there is a wealth of insights they can get out of that, right? And I think it also speaks. One second. I think it also speaks to the need for IT and what we do to help the business understand how they can get the value out of that, which means that we have to automate ourselves out of being box configuration people by leveraging things like infrastructure as code, by leveraging things like toolkits that work across the cloud, like a lot of the NetApp tools, giving our developers access to tools like Trident to do automated provisioning, things like that. We need to automate ourselves out of those day-to-day activities so that we can engage with the business, because we understand IT in a manner that they need at the table as they're trying to make those business processes. Sorry, Ryan.
Yeah, I was going to just answer Vu's question is like point blankly, the answer is yes. From my side, like I'm seeing that across multiple different verticals that I'm working with, whether it's forestry, mining, and financial. All of them are starting to take their data, and I'll use forestry, for example, like they have mountains of pictures of forests, and they're starting to use like something like AWS recognition or an Azure version to start mapping out some of their pictures of where they're logging and getting new data, new information out of this to start optimizing where they're going to log, how to manage their territories in there. And that's by taking maybe like a tertiary copy off of their backup copy. So we're not impacting anything on production performance, or really touching anything on their backup set, which is meant, we're going to archive this off, but we need that third subset, and it might be a smaller subset of data, and like host this at a just-in-time type of instance, run analytics against it, and then when it's done, that data's gone. Like we blow it away and we don't have to think about it, but we have the data that it generated as, again, more net new data for them to utilize intelligently across the organization to help their business kind of evolve and grow.
And you talked about the people thing, KJ. I think that's so important. Like the knowledge that IT ops people bring it can't just be left as, oh, you understand boxes, you understand, switches and networks. It's about how we can better use that, and we've moved from the boxes to now it's the software, and now it's the features in the software and the way that we store the data. That I think that's the skill set that a lot of businesses need. They need to really start to leverage that, or yeah, people need to stand up and go, hey, did you know we have this data set that could make us a lot of money if we just if we just wrote an app to look at, to analyze it.
Yeah, and it really is. I do think that that's an undervalued thing is the IT operations people that we're talking to today. Your business better than I do. You know your business and the way it operates in a way that really benefits the business when you are at the table helping them make good decisions about IT. So that's where I love it when I think part of the motion we're seeing with organizations that are succeeding is they're investing in their people. They're taking the people that know their business and they're helping make sure that their skill sets are up to date, that they can leverage these new tools. So I want to shift to sort of a future view. I want to prognosticate a little bit. I haven't seen any questions, but if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in chat, but feel free to reach out. Reach out to your account manager, your account executive. Again, Ryan, myself, the NetApp crew, we're happy to engage. We're happy to help you, ideate and figure out where you're at, figure out what the next step is in your, maturation process. But if we start to look at this go forward in the future state, one of the things that I think from a data perspective that I really like about the NetApp story is, we've got customers that have virtual cloud volumes ONTAP arrays, basically in the cloud. They're replicating to physical arrays on premises. They're leveraging the ability of, Microsoft Azure or AWS or GCP has availability in areas where maybe they've got smaller offices, but they still have the same data, retention, or they still have the same services, applications they want to deploy. So, one of the values I really see with sort of the NetApp story is building that consistent model. And you talked about the need to have portability between clouds. Well, great. Let's create that. I can't remember who, maybe it was Bob who's listening in, but one of the NetApp guys I talked to, maybe it was Kern, but he mentioned the idea of data inertia rather than data gravity, and data sucks all your applications to it in this sort of like immobilized state. Creating data inertia and creating the portability of your data. So as Ryan mentioned, bring your data to where you want to operate against it, get your insights, throw the data away because you already have your golden copy someplace else. So I really like that story around NetApp, and that's really what I try to talk to customers about. But in addition to that, Keith, what are we going to see from NetApp over the next couple of years? Like what are you guys focused in on bringing to the table? If we consider our data center is really the services we're managing across the public cloud, the private data center, and the edge, what's exciting you about this sort of next couple of years and what NetApp's going to be doing?
Well, the crystal ball question in IT is always a dangerous road to walk. But let me tell you, our vision is to make it seamless and easy for data to transparently move from location to location. So it's at the optimal point at the right time, whether that's at a remote location, as you said, for performance reasons, or whether that's on-prem for security reasons, or a different hyperscaler for availability reasons. Once that's complete, so say we can now move that data wherever we want. One element is going to be cost, right? Is making sure the data is at the right cost at the right time. So as data cools or becomes less valuable, let's move it to a lower cost. I think the next big hurdle is going to be sustainability, because the other element is data today, except for if we're putting it on something inert like tape, which is getting increasingly rare, still consumes energy to keep that data alive, right? It's on media that's consuming power. And as you look around, the world, there's different areas that have very different impacts from an electricity standpoint. Some areas are very sunny, they have tons of solar, they have very green energy. Other areas are much more difficult to generate that energy and have a higher environmental impact. And so I think threading in sustainability into, what is keeping this data costing me, not just from a financial standpoint, but from a sustainability standpoint. I believe that businesses are going to have to start to report on that, right? When you're factoring in your carbon footprint or your sustainability footprint, your data footprint is going to factor into that as well. And so, I think, we're looking at how can we help customers not only have their data portable for financial and availability reasons, let's help them move their data ultimately to greener locations, right, at the right time, and making sure that we minimize the footprint of that data.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah. And I think we are starting to see, sustainability metrics being, part of CEO compensation planning and things like that. So for sure. So Phoebe, sort of the same question to you, what's exciting you about, the types of services, the types of processes, the types of conversations you're going to be having with customers?
Well, I had so many thoughts there, but when Keith said sustainability, like internally, I was like, yes, because I mean that is one of the reasons a lot of people look at the cloud providers and say, hey, they all have a carbon neutral story or a carbon zero story. They're all talking about it. It's a really nice way if you are that CEO, to go, well, we're using the cloud, they're carbon neutral, tick a box. But what really excites me is, as somebody who likes learning new technologies, like I have a billion bookmarks of tutorials and things I've got to go and learn, is that there's so many things coming out that are, adding new capabilities, whether it's, I've played around with DALL-E 2 a lot, the AI engine that makes that consumer basically something that I, a non-data scientist, can go and use. And, in this case, I'm just building pictures of horses and tennis rackets or something, but it's making that consumer friendly. And I always lean towards, well, okay, if this is something that I'm struggling to keep all of this stuff in my head, and how do I learn the newest thing and the next thing and keep on top and get my certs and maintain my day job of running, systems. I think about how NetApp is working to integrate a lot of those technologies and all of the requirements around them, the security, the data protection, the availability, the resilience, trying to integrate them so that it's invisible. And it's just something that the service offers, and that you can kind of go to sleep at night and go, no, I know I'm using a service that's got it's not going to just flip over and disappear. Or it's got these capabilities that I can turn on tomorrow if I need them, and I'm not forced into a lift and shift forklift kind of migration. So I see that usability element becoming a lot more prominent, and that ties into a lot of the other things we were talking about today about this data sprawl. You need it to be usable, and automation. And I'm really excited about that, because I think people are the scarcest resource we have. Skilled people are the hardest resource to come by. You've got to, think about training somebody out of college. It costs so much and it takes time. So we need to invest in all the, the skills that we have today. And I think that's really where I get excited. That and making AI art.
Yeah, and I think our, if I look at it from like an IT and operational perspective, our ticket into the game is really platforms. How do we build platforms to, simplify things so our customers can succeed, but under the covers, we're doing all of these, compliance and security and data resiliency and portability, and we're really just enabling it through these platforms. So completely agree. And then Ryan, you get to close us out. What are you excited about?
I guess I think there's a bit of siloing that's kind of happened over the last couple of years between your on-prem and your cloud native. So I'm kind of really excited about this like reunification of IT coming together to kind of bridge the gap that's kind of going on out there across kind of the organization, having like the new tool sets that are built to go across both, whether it's something like Spot for, let's analyze our cloud and our on-prem, find out some of the costing metrics between both, security products to go like have one product to do both, not, hey, we have our on-prem security and our cloud security suite, and one's maybe a SaaS, one's more agent-based, something as a service. That's where I'm really excited to kind of see, let's start focusing back on the apps and the data, and everything else is something as a service. And as we're kind of going there, like CDW's kind of, I can see us kind of building out these like platforms or infrastructure as a service offerings to just make it really easy for companies to start absorbing all of this new data workloads and making it easier. The comeback of the generalist here is where I'm kind of excited to see, because I've been a generalist all my life across everything, and I that's what's really getting me excited for the next couple of years as we go through.
No, that's great. And thank you again, participants on the call. Really appreciate it. Keith and Phoebe, appreciate your guys' insights today. And then, again, if you want to reach out to your account manager. If you don't have an account manager, there's a link on the website. Go ahead and reach out. Feel free to check out the security study or the cloud report. Both are based off of Canadian specific data. The cloud report and what hybrid infrastructure is doing, the investment levels, a lot of that sort of leads to how we try to frame these discussions. So thanks for your time, and thanks again for coming in.
Thank you.
Thanks for having
Thanks for
us.
having us.
Take care.